Welcome. I'm Jay Shear with Jay Shear Business Consulting. We build solid foundations for service-based businesses to grow and scale, and you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Stephen Hawking said, "Intelligence is the ability to adapt to change." On this episode, we're going to talk about adapting and thriving, leadership, leaning into the uncomfortable, the power of communication, and more. Our guest is a husband and father of 5. He's a former newspaper journalist who wrote for the Boston Herald and the New York Times. He worked on 4 Olympics with NBC Sports, has earned 3 Emmy Awards working across the globe, and left print journalism and media to enter the world of basements. He's a runner, an avid reader, and a podcast junkie. Please welcome the Chief Marketing Officer of Contractor Nation, Tom Matthews. Tom, it is great to see you.
Jay, it's great to see you as well, and thank you so much for giving me the chance to speak with you today on your excellent podcast.
Well, thank you, and I'm grateful for you being here, and I'm so looking forward to this conversation. So let's dig right in. I would love it, Tom, if you would share with our audience a thumbnail sketch of your backstory and the journey that led you to the work that you do today.
Sure. So I've had a very fortunate career. I've worked in excellent places, always of high standards, and I've learned so much along the way, Jay. And I really look at my career in 3 distinct parts. And as you said in the intro, I started my career in print journalism. I went to journalism school at Boston University, worked at the Boston Herald, as you said, and really was ready to set the world on fire as a newspaper reporter. And this is, of course, back at a time when newspapers had significant influence in shaping what was really happening in the world and how people lived their lives. And so I was a part of that in some small way. And so my real big break, I guess, in that regard came when a friend of mine who worked at the New York Times said, "The New York Times is hiring, Tom." And so I went there. And to be clear here, I went there at the lowest level you can imagine. So while I had dreams of having the most important beat, whether it be City Hall or crime at the New York Times, or maybe even politics, I was on what I call the Xerox beat. I was doing lots of copying and serving coffee and answering phones. But I was working with the profession's best. And as a result, I learned quite a bit. And I received perhaps the most important advice in my career there, and that was, "Tom, have you ever thought about being an editor?" So while that felt like a little bit of a punch of a gut in the gut, because what she was really saying was, "I'm not sure you're ready to be a reporter, but you have the mindset and the personality to be a good editor." And I rolled with that, and I'm always thankful to Nancy Sharkey for sharing that candid advice with me. So I went on to become an editor at Dow Jones, and then a small newspaper in Connecticut. And around the time of the early 2000s, newspapers unfortunately took a turn for the worse in terms of their financial status and their ability to be profitable and be influential in the world, because of course the internet was coming on hard and fast, and the newspaper industry by and large was not ready for that. I saw the writing on the wall, and thankfully I knew somebody again who had a contact, and he said, "Tom, there's an opportunity at NBC Sports." I said, "Wow, that's amazing." And coincidentally, it was in the same town I was working at the time, which was Stamford, Connecticut. So I met somebody for breakfast one summer morning, and they told me about the new venture they were launching, their first ever website at NBC Sports. And they said, "What do you know about digital?" And I said, "I think this is the point where I need to speak with full candor here. I know nothing about digital work. I admire it, I respect it, I use it, but I have not done it." And they said, "That's okay, Tom. You will learn. We can tell you're a learner, and that's not why we're hiring you. We're hiring you for your leadership and editorial experience." And so they took a chance on me, and of course, I'll always be grateful for that. And as a result, I quickly moved away from print media and into the next phase of my career, which was digital media. And so in that role, I helped them launch their first ever sports website, NBCsports.com, which was an extraordinary experience, both from a content and a marketing and a leadership point of view. And then based on my work there, somebody knocked on my door one day at the office and said, "Hey, we have an opening for our Olympic unit. Would you consider running our digital operations at the Olympics from an editorial point of view?" And of course, I said yes as fast as I possibly could. And so I quickly was brought up to speed on what matters at the Olympics in terms of the athletes and the stories, as well as what matters to NBC. And so that began a run, as you mentioned, Jay, of four Olympics. And I was on site for 3 of them, and certainly among the most extraordinary experiences of my career. In terms of both the people I worked with, most importantly, incredibly talented, passionate, and driven people, and also the stories that unfolded and a chance to create content around some of the most remarkable athletes and really people that you'll ever, if not know about. And so I was very proud of the work we did there. And my leadership experience continued to grow, and I kept learning more and more. And at the end of my tenure at NBC, I had the opportunity to move down to 30 Rock in New York City and be one of the leadership editors on their team down there for what they call their O&O stations, or their local stations across the country. So we would help support those local stations and provide leadership and editorial and other advice to them so they could be as successful as possible. But during this time, I began to realize that my values and why I had entered this industry, this profession of journalism, were no longer aligned with where the industry was headed. And so I was becoming a little uncomfortable. And so I quickly realized that the industry was not going to change for Tom Matthews, that's for sure. And I decided it was time for me to make a change. And so again, through good fortune, I connected with somebody I had known in the past, professionally and personally. And he called me one day, and I was pretty happy, honestly, still at NBC, but I was thinking about making a change. And so the timing was good. And he said, "Tom, can you think outside the box?" And I said, "I believe I can, Bruce." And then he paused and he said, "Tom, can you think really outside the box?" I said, "Okay, what's going on, Bruce?" And he began to tell me, as you alluded to, Jay, about basements. And that began the third phase of my career. And that is working as the National Director of Marketing here at what's now called Contractor Nation, since we rebranded the company, but at the time was known as Basement Systems, Inc. And we are led by a world-class entrepreneur named Larry Janeski. I work closely with him and the team here. And that's what brings me to this point in the story of my journey.
Well, it is quite a journey of numerous twists and turns. And I want to go back for a bit because you hit on some really important points that I believe would be valuable for everyone. And so a couple of things that I heard was around relationships and the network that you built. And through each of these various phases that you've been on throughout your professional career, there was always someone that you were connected to that at least opened up an opportunity to explore something different. So I wanted to touch on that for a moment. And then also, you mentioned about your own personal values not necessarily lining up with the role that you were in at NBC. So if you could touch on that for a moment, what are your personal values? What changed? And talk about the importance of relationships and building your network.
Sure. So I'll start with the values first. And I want to make one important distinction here. Before I get into that, I certainly never had a problem with NBC. They treated me very well, of course, and I wouldn't be where I am without the experiences that they provided for me along the way in terms of the people that took the time to mentor me and provide feedback for me. So it was really more the values of the industry that, of course, NBC Universal in part is part of, and that is the media world. So when I entered media, there were a set of standards by which they worked every day of the year, really across almost, I don't want to say every, but almost every media outlet. And those standards during my experience in the journalism world began to fade because of business pressures. And what had once been get it right before getting it first flipped, in my opinion, and was much closer to get it first and then we'll worry about it being right. There was such an intense pressure to be first with news because of the presence of the internet, where suddenly news was available in a moment. Whereas before, news would be gathered and vetted, discussed, and published in print the next day very carefully. But now news was being published, at breakneck speed. And in fairness, as members of the media, myself included, we were all adjusting to this on the fly and figuring this out as we went along. But in my opinion, the standards began to fall for what really is called news versus what is simply information. That's really where my discomfort began to grow. I pride myself on being a person of integrity and being a person who really takes care of other people and tells their story the right way so that the honest and really full version is presented. And the ability to do that, in my opinion at least, was dwindling. And so while there's still some great storytelling happening, certainly in journalism, I think there's less than ever before. And the industry standards have reached a point where I'm not comfortable with it. So that really conflicted with what I believe, again, is one of my most important values, and that's being a person of integrity each and every day. And really, if you don't believe in what you're doing anymore, I don't know how you can be happy. And if that's the case, I don't believe you can stay in that position. So it was very much a personal decision for me. And honestly, it was a difficult one. I don't want to sound too dramatic here, but it was hard to sort of walk away from that place in my life because it had been so good to me and afforded me so many extraordinary opportunities.
So let's talk then about the relational side. Sure. And having your community or your network around you. So that certainly seems to be something that's been very valuable and meaningful to you throughout your career. Speak to that for a moment.
Sure, absolutely. I am not an ace networker by any means. It's something that I have been working on, particularly in recent years, even harder than I did in the past. I've always had the good fortune to know good people and to work with really good people. So that's really what helped me most. And so I actually recounted recently in a lesson to my son, which I believe he was only partially listening to because he's about to embark upon his career as he graduates from college. And I was trying to explain to him the importance of connections and these things that we're discussing. And I went back, Jay, and looked at every job, and I mean every job I've had in my career, from the most mundane as a young man to more senior positions as I moved along. And all but one came through somebody I knew, every one of them. And what I realized was, yes, networking is important, but it's really about who you are every day, your genuine, authentic self. Because what I realized in looking back was they felt comfortable when somebody came to them and said, hey, I need a person to fill such and such a job. For whatever reason, they thought of me. And of course, that makes me feel very good, but I want to make sure your listeners and viewers understand that it's because they had seen me in action in some capacity, either at a school event or maybe at a family event or maybe at a community event, whatever it may be. And they made a judgment about me that thankfully was a good one. And so they were comfortable when somebody came to them and said, I need somebody. Well, you should talk to Tom Matthews. And that's a lot of how this unfolded throughout my career. And I didn't really realize that at the time. I certainly wasn't acting in any way. I was essentially being myself. But that really means more than anything. Every day. So certainly networking matters, and I'll get to that in a second, but being your genuine, authentic self on a really consistent basis, I think is invaluable and allows people to know who you are and whether or not they can trust you and put you in these positions for new opportunities. So whether it was college professors early in my career, or I mentioned the opportunity I had at the Times, and then I had at NBC, it was because people had seen me in action, and whatever vibe, if you will, that I was sending off, they were comfortable with and they liked. And so obviously my professional skills and experience were a factor, no doubt. But I think what mattered more in terms of their comfort with referring me was who I was as a person. So I think that's a huge component of it. Now, having said that, I have certainly kept networking in mind throughout my career. I've joined some professional associations. And when LinkedIn came onto the scene, I became very active in that. I've always been a big fan of LinkedIn. And so that has helped me as well, because it's allowed people to, of course, like everyone, keep tabs on what I'm working on and do some writing to share with people, et cetera. And this job in particular has allowed me to raise my profile a little bit, Jay, and be speaking publicly, which is not something I had done before this job. I had spoken in meetings and, occasionally spoken at community events, but this job has put me in the uncomfortable place of presenting at our professional trainings and again, community events. And we have an annual convention that we host for about 1,500 people. And so I've been presenting at that. And so what happens is it gives people a chance to get to know you in that regard as well. And so I think that has created opportunities for me too, because they've seen me and apparently like what I have to say. So on a couple of occasions, people have said, "Oh, I saw you at so-and-so event, so I want you to meet this other gentleman or this other woman. I think you'd be a good fit to help them with their events or speak in front of their team," or something like that. So I hope that gives you a little insight as to sort of how it's come about for me.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you. And it reminds me of a quote by Harvey Mackay, and that is, "Dig your well before you're thirsty." and it reminds me of that quote when it comes to networking, because I know early on in my career, although I was showing up to serve and trying to provide as much value as I could, what I wasn't doing at that point, and this was early on, was building my network. And so I've learned some very valuable lessons over the years about that. And it's never too late to start, but the earlier you start building a network and providing value to others, it will be beneficial to all as your career continues to develop and evolve.
You know what? That's a really excellent point. If you don't mind me just following up on that real quick, Jay.
Sure.
I think it's important. I was mistakenly humble in the early part of my career. And I took pride in sort of flying under the radar. And I told myself it's better to be humble and not seek attention and just go about my business, dig the well, as you say. But I did too much digging when I look back, and not enough sharing about, what I was digging about and some of the treasures, if you will, that I was uncovering. That's a mistake. And I think people don't fully understand what it means to be humble and this idea of humility. And by no means am I an expert on it, but I think really what is happening is people are uncomfortable talking about themselves because they feel like that's either egotistical or arrogant. It's not. You almost have an obligation from a professional point of view and a responsibility to share your story with other people. It's very important how you do it, of course, but not sharing it is a big mistake. And I made that early on in my career. And I was lucky, frankly, that people were noticing me and observing me without me doing much networking. But if I had to do it over again, I'm with you. I should have been much more active early because, of course, not only do people notice you, but you also just get better at it, right? You're gaining experience in the networking way. I think it's uncomfortable for most people. So if you start later, like anything in life, it's going to be that much harder. But humility is not talking about yourself, right? That's, in my opinion, like that's okay. Humility to me is more just being open to learning, to be frank, and humbling yourself in a way that you recognize you don't know everything. Separate conversation, sorry. But I think people get confused about that. And certainly I did. And the last thing I want to say is it's amazing how many people are willing to help you. And when you don't network and you don't share your story, you miss the opportunity for others to help you. And that could really prevent you from gaining new responsibilities and new opportunities.
Yeah, very valuable point. I mean, you've said a lot there. Asking for help, which is not always the easiest thing in the world to do for many of us, but asking for help is huge. And it's, to your point, it's amazing when you're open, when you're candid, when you are transparent, and when you ask for help, the number of people that are willing to step up and lend a hand, whether it's making a connection, right, or just providing resources, whatever it may happen to be for you, it truly is incredible. And that is one of the benefits of having a community around you. And you serve that community too. So it's not taking, right? It's giving and receiving.
Well said. Totally agree. Really good point, Jay.
So what does leadership mean to you?
Leadership means to me service, taking care of other people so that they can become the best versions of themselves. And when you do that, it's amazing to see the results that follow. I didn't realize early on in my career that that's essentially what I was doing. I've always been focused on serving others and creating success for other people. But I'm more focused on it, and I've sort of gained clarity on the meaning of leadership. I believe, particularly during my time here at Contractor Nation, I've had an opportunity to be a leader in a much different kind of way, and it's really helped me understand what my role here is as a leader. And so I have been fortunate to be surrounded by very talented people, and what I've realized they need most from me when it comes to a leadership point of view is the support, again, to be the best version of themselves. So offering them encouragements and also offering them candid feedback, even when it's not what they want to hear. That's one way you certainly serve people. And creating opportunities for them. It's amazing what people can do if you just kind of guide them a little bit or steer them in a slightly different direction. Doesn't mean everybody is going to respond well, but it's amazing how many have for me. So when I have led with service first and put myself second, which honestly has been hard to do because I'm an ambitious guy, I'll say that. And I do want to get ahead, and I do want to gain new responsibilities and create new opportunities for myself, for sure. But I have found that when I do it first for others, not only do they gain, but I gain as well. And that has been a great learning for me.
Yeah, very interesting. What are some of the key leadership lessons that you've learned from your past experiences that have helped shape how you show up today? Because you mentioned that you've learned some lessons, you lead differently today. What are some of those valuable lessons that you've learned?
Well, there's so many. I guess I'd start with, and this, of course, it comes as you gain more responsibility and become a more senior leader, but I don't need to do all the work myself. I felt when I was younger to be a leader, I confused, I think a little bit, my leadership role with sort of the contributor role. I was really in the weeds. When I look back for too long, I had the opportunities and I just didn't see them to sort of rise above that a little bit and create opportunities for other people and give them the work. And I don't mean just in the sense of delegating, like, here, you do it. It was more that I was probably blocking talented people from doing better at what I was trying to do myself, because I had the experience from a year's point of view over them. These would be people on my team, and I would say, we're going to do this. But really what I did was I did it. And they were probably, as I look back, scratching their head, well, Tom, that's not really weird. That's you. And so I think I probably did it in part because that was my comfort zone, doing the work. And also I was probably a little afraid that if I didn't do the work, maybe I wouldn't get noticed and maybe I wouldn't have new opportunities. And, I'm not quite ashamed of that, but I recognize the flaw in my thinking there for sure. So that's a big learning now is letting talented people do their best work by guiding them, encouraging them, and helping them, but staying out of their way so they can do that. So that's certainly one lesson for me. And honestly, a lot of people would say, well, how did you not know that sooner? I don't know. Maybe I just wasn't confident enough, Jay, or maybe I was a little anxious. Who knows? But I wish I had learned that sooner, because it would have helped me, and I think it probably would have helped other people. So that's a big one. I think also a big leadership lesson for me that I've learned over the years is it's simple. And what I mean by that is, as the leader, I think one of the things, and I take this idea and thought from another woman who's a high-level leader, and unfortunately I cannot remember at the time what company she worked for, but I read this in a newspaper article about 2 years ago, and she said, really, leadership is taking care of other people. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. She's like, there's all these different words that are associated with leadership, and however true they may be, in her opinion, when you boil it down to taking care of other people, that's when leaders are at their best and really helping their people the most. So what does that mean? Well, maybe it means bringing, coffee on a rainy Monday morning when you have a big project in the week ahead. Or maybe it's really listening to somebody who's struggling personally, and comes to you to talk about it, even though you might be uncomfortable talking about their personal life, or you have a lot of things on your to-do list, but they're standing at your door, clearly needing someone to speak with. So you take a break from your work and you listen to them. Or maybe it's pushing them, and it's not just TLC, it's really pushing them and taking care of them by showing them that they can accomplish more, they can be more and do more. That's also taking care of somebody. So I say that's a big lesson for me as well, is to really take care of people. And I'm not going to lie to you, I'm not the most tender, sensitive guy in the world. So for me, that has been a little bit of a challenge, because really what you're doing is you're opening yourself up and sharing yourself with other people. And that's definitely not my comfort zone. I definitely love to hear other people's stories and be with them, but really sharing myself in a more intimate way has been challenging for me. But when I've done it, I have seen the benefits, because the people on my team have given more. And I think they had a little more respect for me and a little more connection with me. And that mattered to them in a way that I couldn't quite understand. So taking care of people, that's a big lesson for me as well. So those are two things that come to mind, Jay.
Yeah, those are great lessons. And I also appreciate you sharing about what's uncomfortable for you, right? And being that person who opens up and shares. And as you saw, as a result, when you've done that, you build a much closer relationship with your team, and they're more willing to open up and share. And you've got that human connection that just cannot be understated. And remarkable things begin to happen when you have those types of relationships. And you and I had the opportunity to have just a wonderful conversation a while back. And one of the things that we talked about was leadership, but we also talked about ego. And I want to touch on ego for a moment, because it's been one of those areas for me that certainly has been a challenge, and I would say it's a constant work in progress. But there were certainly times throughout my life and my career where I allowed my ego to just get in my way, and I had a very difficult time getting out of my own head. And I try to look back and figure out, why was that happening and why did I allow that to happen? And I've learned a lot since then, and I continue to learn. But touch on how the impact that ego has had throughout your career, because you've been in some outstanding roles. What has that impact been like for you, and how have you dealt with ego yourself?
That's a really good question. And when I look back on my life, both personally and professionally, and think about the mistakes that I've made, and there have been plenty of them, I can sit here and say probably every mistake I made was tied to my ego getting in the way of doing the right thing. I'm probably exaggerating slightly, but not much. And it's a reminder, I think, to everybody, as you say, to keeping your ego in check is so critically important. And so for me, I struggled, and still do, frankly, from a day-to-day basis, not terribly, but it's always like deciding, when do I put myself first and put others first? And as I mentioned, over my career, I have become more comfortable. And I think maybe it's because you gain confidence during your career, to allow others to go ahead of you and set your ego aside. But I can think of one story in particular, if you don't mind me sharing it, where my ego really put a hurting on me and other people. So I was at the Vancouver Olympics in 2010, and going into the Olympics, we typically would identify what we believe would be the largest and most impactful storylines, and then we would build our content around that, whether it was print, photo, or video. And there were some key athletes in the Olympics. So without naming names, there was one particular athlete who there was a certain amount of sensitivity around, and we were asked to, operate sensitively around this athlete. And so I bristled at that as a journalist, and I was still probably closer to my journalism career, certainly, than I am now. So and the role certainly called for my journalistic skills in that space. So I never really left them behind, and I always carried them with me because it was a practical use of what I had experienced. Anyway, it made me a little uncomfortable that we were going to be sensitive in this situation, because I felt like maybe we were bending the rules a little bit. So fast forward, we're actually at the Olympic Games, and on the website, we published a story about this particular athlete, and I thought it was innocuous. Now, I won't lie to you. I paused before the publish button was hit by one of my colleagues, thinking, man, this is this athlete. Do we really need this story? But my ego told me, you push the story out because you don't change your standards for anybody, Tom. you do what's best for your journalism ethics. So we hit the button, and before I could barely see the story populated on the websites, a ruckus had been caused, and there was a significant problem on my hands. Let me tell you, this was digital media. I'm like, wow, this is a lot quicker than print. At least I would have had a little time in between the ruckus. Anyway, to his credit, my boss intervened and really spoke well on my behalf to a much more senior level person. And I was really nervous. I wasn't sure what was going to happen at that point. There was a lot of upsetment and anger. And you know what? I was wrong, 100% wrong, because what I really did was put my own needs ahead of the team's needs and ahead of the company's needs. Big mistake. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize how ego-driven it was at the time, but that experience has stayed with me for my entire career. And a few years ago, I was retelling the story, and for some reason it just connected. I'm like, my ego. At the time, I just thought I'd made a bad mistake, and I wasn't quite sure why. I just said, oh, bad judgment. But really, it was bad judgment because of an overactive ego. I was so concerned about what mattered to me, and I wasn't looking at the big picture about how it would impact other people. The athlete himself, the athlete's family, our company and its business goals, my team, most importantly, probably, as a leader of the team. So that's, I believe, a good example of ego going astray.
Yeah,
I will never make that mistake again.
Yeah, good for you. That's a great lesson, and thank you for sharing it, because
Sure.
I think that's one that will resonate with our viewers and those that are listening to this as well. And, you know, there is nothing more powerful than perspective. And when we are able to kind of pull back, extract ourselves from a situation and just pause, right? Be able to pause for a moment and ask ourselves, can I look at this differently, this situation? And sometimes just getting that perspective and being able to look at it through a different set of optics can be, it can help tremendously, right? Because it allows us to see the situation from different angles and not just look at it from our perspective or our point of view, but how are my actions going to impact the overall situation?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And again, that's been an area of growth for me, which is still a work in progress. But if I could share one other quick story with you on that note,
please.
The recent and ongoing, unfortunately, pandemic has been a great opportunity for me again to think hard about my ego and my perspective. And what I mean by that is, as the leader of a team of people who I think all but one are younger than me, they all reacted in a way that I didn't to the news of the pandemic, as well as the true impact of it, you know, the health and safety concerns. I took it seriously for sure, but I have a comfort level, I'll just say it that, with the talk of it and the sort of nature of it. I'm not happy about it. I think it's a very serious matter. My point being is that other people, I learned during this situation, react much differently. They're more scared, they're more anxious, they're more fearful. And when I saw that at first, I won't lie to you, there was a little sense of disappointment in me, because I was like, come on, you know, we can take it seriously, but, you know, let's not let it get us down, and let's keep going forward and stuff like that. But for some people, it resonated so deeply to the point where they were like exhausted by it. And I'm not even talking about physically having it, just the whole nature of it and the concern of it. And so for me, it made me really think hard about their needs versus my own, their feelings versus my own. And what I quickly learned, and I'm a little embarrassed to say that I didn't pick this up on day one, was obviously not everyone's going to either have the confidence or the comfort with the discussion of it, et cetera, over the months, that they'll be hit in a different way emotionally and mentally by it. And so I had to reposition myself and really set my ego aside and say, what I think about people's reactions does not matter. What matters is their reaction. What matters are their feelings, because these are the people on my team, and I want them to be at their best and feel like they're in a safe and healthy place, and that we're making decisions, going back to my point about taking care of them. So again, my initial reaction was not what I would hoped it would be. It wasn't terrible, but it could have been better. And I believe it was driven by my own egotistical perspective on how I believe they should react. I have since, again, corrected that and getting better.
What I love about that story, excuse me, is the self-awareness piece of it, right? So although you recognized that I still have more to learn, right? I still have more areas where I can grow, but you were able to at least recognize it. And what a wonderful opportunity to show up as a leader and be able to listen to those concerns of your teammates and, right, show some compassion, show some empathy, and let's figure out together how can we work through this, right? Because we absolutely we want to be able to continue to operate as a team. We want to continue to look for solutions. We want to continue to look for ways to serve, but we also need to be right. We need to show compassion. We need to understand how we're all feeling so we can create some sort of comfort zone that's going to allow us to then be a catalyst for future growth. So I'm sure that was an incredible lesson for you. And so again, that's one of those gifts that life gives us. We just have to be aware of it, make sure that we're looking at it with eyes wide open and learn from it.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So when you were at NBC Sports, your division was truly a startup. So what was that experience like? And again, I'm going to go back to lessons because we learn them in so many different ways. But what did you learn about that startup process, and what have you taken away from that you apply to your life today?
Sure, great. So I'm always happy to talk about it. It was one of the most formative experiences of my career. So the three words that come to mind immediately when I think about those early days were exhausting, uncomfortable, but exhilarating. We were really late to the game in terms of launching a full-on sports website. NBC had really, I'd say, struggled with its entry into digital on the sports side because they had been so successful on the broadcast side. And I think it's fair to say there was some level of concern about how going digital might impact revenue, and it's significant revenue for sure on NBC Sports. So as a result, when we launched the sports website, we were a little late to the game, but of course, suddenly everyone wanted to do it right now, So I entered sort of at the right now phase. And of course, I thought about asking on day one, well, why didn't you start this 2 years ago? But I felt that wasn't in my best career interest to mention that to them. So I just joined the fray. And so it was nonstop work. Kind of like what you've heard about or seen in terms of startup atmospheres. It was not in Silicon Valley. It was in this small city in Connecticut called Stamford, but we were in this office space where we spent a ton of time basically between July and September. We launched the site in really less than 3 months. It was close to like 8 or 10 weeks. And it was amazing, though, what could be accomplished in such a short period of time when you were so focused on an end result. So that was a big lesson for me. It was certainly a lot of lessons learned and mistakes made along the way as part of that. But it is amazing if you come together as a team and rally around a very specific goal, what you can get done. So that was one lesson for me. I would say another lesson for me was, adaptability. I was now thrown in this space where I was incredibly uncomfortable. I didn't know the people, of course. I was asked to build a team very quickly and, really sell them on the idea, get them to leave their current job, so we could have talented people on our team, sell them in on this idea. And then, oh, by the way, you're probably going to work 12 to 14 hours a day for the next 8 to 10 weeks. And while we paid fairly, nobody was going to get rich as a result of this job move that they might be making. So for me, I had to adapt in so many ways. I was been in routines and newspapers, and even though I had increasing responsibility, I was to some degree repeating myself. And this was no repetition here. This was full on new kind of game. So I rolled with it. And thankfully, being in the news space really gives you those skills to be successful and effective in that fluid environment. But this tested me in a much different way. And also, when there's some level of chaos, people are not always at their best. So you may not be getting the happy and positive and chummy version of them every day. As time goes by, as you get closer to that deadline and you realize there's so much to do, some people are not reacting well. So you have a decision in that moment to make. How do I react to their bad reaction? Do I meet that in an equally bad way, or do I sort of dig deeper and again set my ego aside and focus on solving a problem or trying to maybe calm them down and get to a better place? So I opted for the latter more often than not. I'm not going to say hit it out of the park every time, but more often than not, that's the option I chose because I felt like that was the right thing to do. And frankly, it would just help us get more done. And that's what I was really focused on. So that adaptability and really flexibility were critical factors in the ability to make the product live in the time that we could. And then the adapting just continued for the next year. We're learning so much on the fly, and the business environment was changing at the same time. And it was a constant test of your ability to be flexible. And the last thing I want to say from a leadership point of view, I think my big lesson there was learning to be, again, as genuine, as authentic as you could be. I didn't learn what we had at the time was a software tool called a content management system. I won't get into the details, but I had a team of people doing it. And I made the decision that I'm not going to learn it because I'm going to rise above that. As I mentioned before, stay out of the weeds. I didn't really understand how hard it was to learn this new system, really how faulty the system was and why they were so truly frustrated. And to be frank, I faked it a little bit. And they picked up on that for sure. That was a mistake. I should have just rolled up my sleeves for a short period of time. I don't think I should have become a master in it, but I think I should have been more empathetic and shown a greater level of interest in learning the tool, helping better understand why it didn't work well. I simply just said, you deal with it. And when they asked me about it, I pretended a little bit around what I knew or didn't know. Big mistake. I think they eventually, in some regards, called me out on it. So I reset when we relaunched another content management system because we were changing rapidly about a year later. And I spent time understanding the tool better. And again, I didn't become a master at it, but I knew enough about it to help them make better decisions and ultimately just help them understand that I was in this with them and that I could make better decisions by understanding more what their struggles were. So that was a big learning for me too.
Well, there's no question that those learnings have served you well and continue to serve you well. And I believe that one of the most important aspects of that is no matter where we are in our careers, there's always more to learn. And there are going to be things that are going to come up in our roles. And as long as we're open to feedback and that we take that feedback and process it the right way and look at it as an opportunity to grow, as an opportunity to learn, then that is where the growth happens. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Sure.
So tell me how mindset plays a role in your life.
So mindset for me means more than it ever has. And that's really due to the influence of my current CEO, Larry Janeski here at Contractor Nation, who is a lifelong learner and who has really pushed me to be an even better learner myself and really has showed me the value of mindset and how that impacts what you do every day. For whatever reason, I'm a naturally positive person, Jay. I think it's mostly because I've had a very fortunate life with good parents and good siblings and wonderful wife and children, et cetera. And I really have had really no true struggles. I've had the small ones that everyone has. So I have good reason to be positive is my point. So I've always been naturally positive. So that's been helpful in terms of my mindset. But as I think you get older and you either grow impatient or maybe just get a little more tired, I think it's easy to slip more into a negative place and think about the things that aren't going well and why you didn't get the promotion and why people, are treating you a particular way. So what I have worked hard on is continuing my positive mindset by really daily practices. I think mindset is everything. And again, my CEO has helped me really better understand that. And also he has really showed me that the habits that you create for yourself and then maintain, of course, are what allow you to keep the right mindsets or in fact change it if you need to. So very quickly, if you're interested in any details, for me to keep a positive and outlook and a good mindset, I give thanks both day and night for all the goodness in my life, in very, short doses. I believe strongly in that. And then also I run. And for me, running allows me to almost literally open my mind and think about the good things that are happening to me. And it allows me to process some of the things that haven't gone well and examine why they didn't go well. And as I mentioned before, more often than not, it's my ego. But anyway, as I'm running, I think about these things, and I do what I call, and others I'm sure would call self-talk. It's really helps me sort of stay balanced. And when I'm done with that, not only do I feel sort of physically satisfied, but I feel mentally satisfied as well. So that's an important way for me to keep that mindset. And also the content I consume. I mentioned before the media, and without getting too deep into my feelings about that, I have chosen personally to spend very little time each day reading or watching anything to do with the news, which, as you can imagine, for somebody who spends so much time in their career doing that, that has been a very challenging habit to set for myself, but I have seen the rewards of it. And again, this is just a personal decision for me. Everyone makes their own decision about how they consume content and what they watch. But for me, it's been a real difference maker. Setting aside the news and also listening to podcasts and reading books that allowed me to develop a much stronger growth mindset about how I can be better, how I can treat others better, and about what's possible in the world if I keep moving in the right direction, the right way.
Yeah, powerful. So what are 1 to 2 books then that you are either reading right now or have read that have had a significant impact on your mindset and your outlook on life?
Sure. The book I'm reading right now is called, I believe it's called The Splendid and the Vile. And it's a biography essentially of Winston Churchill that my father gave me. And he said, "Oh, you might be interested in reading this." And I wasn't sure I was. So it sat on my shelf for a couple of months. And then when I couldn't get into the library because of the pandemic, I said, I'm going to read this thing. It's a fascinating look at somebody who is so truly positive and tenacious in the face of so much difficulty and challenge. I mean, it's remarkable to see how Winston Churchill never really gave over in his thinking to what could go wrong and, the true really terror that they faced. I mean, he was feeling it, he was seeing it around London, but his ability in the face of all that to keep pushing ahead and never stop moving forward was remarkable. And I'm not done with it yet. I almost am. So that's one book I'm currently reading that is having an immediate impact on me. And also, I have read several books by a gentleman named Matthew Kelly, who and he's had a significant impact on me as well in terms of developing the right habits that lead to the right virtues for you as a human being, and how you can be a positive influence on the life of others, because I do really believe that that's what I'm here for and we're all here for, but it's hard to do on a day-to-day basis unless you really work at it. Turns out that things that you thought when you were younger came naturally to people, you recognize now that no, it came through hard work and the habits they developed, and they really, believed in what they were doing. And so their work coincided with that and were able to make it happen. So those are sort of two book topics.
Terrific. Thank you for sharing those.
Sure.
So obviously reading, listening to podcasts, and there may be some other parts of your self-development process that allow you to continue to grow personally and professionally. Do you also employ the use of coaches? Are there mentors in your life? Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. I've always prided myself, at least until recently, doing things on my own and being more independent. And that was a mistake for sure. As I mentioned before, I should have networked a little sooner, and I also should have relied on mentors a little bit sooner. So thankfully, I've had lots of people help me along the way, no doubt about it, but I could have cultivated those relationships better. So having said that, there are a couple people who, despite my streak of independence, they're stuck with me, thankfully. One of them is my godfather, and he's been a tremendous influence on me. And he's a person I can turn to at any time and talk about my job, my role as a husband, my role as a father, in any really subject. And he will give me the most sound, candid advice you could ever hope for. And so I'm always thankful for him. So he's a key person in my life in terms of a mentor. And, in my current job, I work with a lot of talented people, but I pay most attention to the actions and behavior of our CEO, because he is such a fascinating and successful person. And I really believe in him and feel like I've learned in my time here at the company so much with him. Again, that's Larry Janeski. So while he may not be officially a mentor, he's somebody who I know I'm learning from and certainly has been good to me. And so I'm thankful for that as well. And the last thing I'll say is, over the last year or two, I have spoken with a coach. I found it very helpful, and that has really opened my mind to speaking to other people and the value of opening yourself up and allowing people to really help you.
Terrific. So you've recently launched a new venture called Your Words But Better. So tell us about that, and what was the catalyst for starting it?
I've always wanted to operate my own, let's call it venture or business. And being in the environment I am right now for the past 5 years, which is really entrepreneurial, both in terms of our company itself and the clients that we serve out in across North America, they are all entrepreneurs in their own right, has really stimulated in me this idea of being responsible for your own business and your own, owning the results, as they say. So I thought about what was my unique talents. What could I offer people that would be helpful to them? And after giving it a lot of thought, it really came down to my work around writing. Every job I've ever had professionally, sort of in and post college, has been tied in some way to the ability to write. And I've always taken great pleasure in that, and I've become a fairly strong writer. But then I thought, the world is full of writers. What really makes me different than them? And there certainly are some that are better than me. So I started to refine the idea and eventually realized that what I believe best at, Jay, is really helping people create a message for themselves, whether it's for their business, whether it's for an event, whether it's for a personal matter. It's really helping them find the right words. I think everybody has something important to say, although most people tend to struggle with writing, so they're not sure how to give the right and most effective words to their thoughts. And so what I have decided is I can take your words and make them better, hence the Your Words But Better. I don't want to take away your thoughts and your feelings. I just want to shape them and optimize them and make them better. I have a knack, because of my background and because of my late mother and her passion for language, that allows me to always, I believe, find a better word than what you've come up with so you can deliver your message even more effectively.
So would a client come to you who wants to write a book? Is this for marketing content?
That's a good question. It's more for marketing content. I could certainly help someone with a book, but I feel like there's plenty of people in the world who can do that. And certainly there's no shortage of people who can help with marketing content either. But I think my genuine interest in helping people and really wanting them to be successful, I think allows me to work in a particular way with a client that's me apart from other people. And so I have the experience with words. I have the experience with marketing. I know how to communicate clearly. I do think that's a strength of mine. And so I think in particular, I can be helpful to small business owners. I think they have so much burden on them each and every day, whether they're worried about marketing, sales, their call centers, whatever it may be, depending on the size of their business. And so I think they too often settle for mediocre when it comes to their marketing messages, just so they can get it done. And I think I can take what they've done and make it stronger and more effective, because that will, of course, generate more leads for them and ultimately lead to greater success for them. So small business, I think, is really my sweet spot.
Fantastic. Well, best of luck with that new venture. It sounds exciting.
Thank you very much.
So what would you like your legacy to be?
I'd like it to be that people think of me and they remember me as having had a positive influence in some way on their life. It's as simple as that. And while that may sound broad, I think it is meaningful. And so it's really about how I believe it's how I help them really become a better version of themselves. I think of my godson. I think of my own children, of course. I think of the people on my team. And then I think of people maybe that I don't know so well, but that the interaction they had with me at a particular time had a positive impact on them and helped them move to a better place, however slightly it may be.
Wonderful. And what message would you like to leave our audience with?
A message of growth, Jay, a message of growth. I think what I have learned in my career and my life is, as you mentioned already, every day is a chance to learn and grow and be better, be a better person, be a better employee, be a better family member, whatever it may be. But if you have a growth mindset, and again, it's taken me a while to get to this place, but it has really unlocked in me a sense of so many new possibilities. So I would just encourage everyone who's watching or listening to do what they need to do to develop a growth mindset. And when you do, really the world will open up to you in a completely different way. And I think you'll find a level of happiness that you just currently don't have. And it will make every day that much more enjoyable for you and your ability, again, to impact others positively.
Beautiful. So before I ask my final question to you, where can we go to connect with you?
The best place to go to me is on LinkedIn. So I'm under Tom Matthews on LinkedIn, and my current employer is Contractor Nation. So my guess is I'm not the only Tom Matthews on LinkedIn, but I'm the slightly balding, or maybe mostly balding gentleman with a smile on his face in his bio picture. So I really enjoy connecting with people most on LinkedIn, and anyone who's watching or listening is welcome to do so.
Terrific. Well, we'll make sure that we link to that in the show notes. So here is my final question to you. What is one of the biggest gifts that life's given you that you didn't realize at the time?
The biggest gift that life has given me that I did not realize at the time was the advice I received from the editor, and I'm sorry to repeat a story here, Nancy Sharkey at the New York Times. That advice on the professional side of things was the most important advice I ever received, because it was candid and direct. And when you give somebody such candor, I believe it shows a true level of concern and care. And that set my career in a completely different direction. And it set me on this path to do what I really believe I was supposed to do, and that's help other people. And it was because I was an editor, I was able to help other people. And I've maintained that editing mindset in everything I've done throughout my entire life, really optimizing the life of other people's, shaping and molding it so they can find a better version of themselves and more. So that feedback she gave me, Jay, really did change my life. And it took me a long time to realize that. And as I mentioned, the initial reaction was like a punch in the gut. But let me tell you, I'm thankful every day that she took the time to give me such candid and important advice.
Outstanding. Thank you. And thank you so much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. As I mentioned in our first conversation and also at the beginning of this conversation, I'm grateful for you, and I appreciate you sharing candidly and openly your story, sharing your wisdom, sharing your knowledge, and sharing from the heart. So thank you for being here.
It's been a pleasure, Jay, and I appreciate you and giving me this opportunity to speak with you and your listeners and viewers today to talk a little bit about myself, with the hope that maybe it will have a positive impact on what they're doing next.
And I know it will. And for you, thank you for watching and listening, and I'd love to hear your takeaways from this episode. So if you will, please take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment, and to enjoy more episodes and to learn how Jay Shear Business Consulting can build a solid foundation for your service-based business. Visit jayshearbusinessconsulting.com. And until next time, keep learning and growing, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care.